Good evening, everyone. I'm pleased to welcome all of you to today's academic session organized by the Tillotoma Foundation. Today's session focuses on determinants of China's foreign policy, a subject that is central to contemporary international relations and global politics. China's evolving role economically, strategically, and institutionally has been one of the most influential factors shaping global geopolitics in the 21st century. Understanding the drivers behind China's external behavior, its political structures, security priorities, economic ambitions, historical narratives, and regional engagements is essential for situating broader developments in Asia and the world. We are joined today by Professor Srikanth Kondapalli, Professor of China Studies at Jawaharlal Nehru University and a former Dean of the School of International Studies, JNU, and former chairman of the Center for East Asian Studies at JNU. As one of India's leading scholars on China, his work provides a comprehensive and structured understanding of China's domestic drivers, external strategies, and regional and global engagements. His expertise will offer valuable clarity as we examine the determinants informing China's foreign policy choices. I am very happy to welcome Professor Kondapalli. He has been associated with the Tillotoma Foundation for many years, having been part of several of our key initiatives in the past. With that, it is my pleasure to invite Professor Kondapalli to kindly begin with his talk. Over to you, sir.
Thank you very much to the Tillotoma Foundation and to you, Ms. Kamakshi Wilson. As has been mentioned, we are discussing today about the determinants of China's foreign policy. So basically, I have a few propositions here in terms of the determinants. I would suggest five main determinants to start with, and we can take it forward in terms of the discussion later on. The first and foremost determinant in China's foreign policy is the Communist Party's ideology and aspirations. I think that is the most important one. The second, of course, for every foreign policy, the national interests configure in every other country's foreign policy. So no exception here for the Chinese in terms of that national interest. But what is interesting is prior to 1982, according to Yan Xuetung, there was no mention about national interests in the Communist Party literature in terms of their foreign policy posture. They were talking more about ideology, third world, how communism can be spread, but no national interests. We in IR studies assume national interests to be the most determinant aspect for every other country, but in the case of China, it comes to the second position rather than the first position in every other country. So first is the Communist Party's ideology and preferences, aspirations, and so on. The third determinant is nationalism. Sometimes it is not very explicitly mentioned. Nevertheless, this is a very important feature of the Chinese foreign policy. It began with Mao Zedong and it continues with Xi Jinping currently. Nationalism is the bedrock of China's foreign policy, and it has been fused with the Communist Party's aspirations. The fourth is globalization. Has become a major determinant in China's foreign policy since the Chinese accession to the WTO, the World Trade Organization. And in that period, the 2001, when China joined the WTO, its trade was about $200 billion, total trade. Today, China's trade is over $4 trillion. That is roughly the GDP of India. Just the trade component, exports and imports, is about $4 trillion for China. And that suggests the globalization is a very key variable in China's foreign policy, a determinant. However, we have seen recently in the 13th and 14th five-year plan. The 14th five-year plan will end this year, 2025. And they have mentioned the dual circulation. Dual circulation basically means that focusing on internal, drivers of economic growth rate, domestic consumption, increasing the outreach of the companies' products inside China, while also exporting. So, in other words, the dual circulation is a new policy which is leading to deglobalization. So, globalization is one determinant, but we also have, because of the Chinese assessment that the Americans would impose tariffs. So they woke up earlier than President Trump to to prepare for the tariff imposition on Chinese goods, as we saw in the Trump first administration in 2018-19, and now in the second administration for the past 10 months. There have been a lot of tariffs. These tariffs have been rolled back after the Busan meeting in APEC in Seoul, in South Korea, in Busan on October 31st. So there was an agreement between United States and China for the tariff reductions for 1 year till November of 2026. So this appears to be a kind of deglobalization by China, selective deglobalization, even though there are several tendencies for globalization continuing. For example, the CPTPP membership that China aspires for, or the RCEP that it had already signed some 4 years ago. So these are all instruments of globalization. There are several others, including the pushing of China's standards. Today, China is now a rule maker capacity country, not a rule taker. And it has been suggesting that for cyber domain, for space domain, for maritime domain, some standards need to be observed by other countries. And these are based on the Chinese suggestions, which means that there is the China standards gaining ground in the international system. For example, 5G networks. China is the leader in 5G telecom, and there are standards that are introduced, and everybody has to catch up with these standards. China is already preparing for 6G telecommunications, and this suggests again that there is the Chinese standards now being referred to in various countries. So let me first start with the first determinant, uh, which is Communist Party's ideology and aspirations. Now, as we all know, Chinese Communist Party is about 99 million cadres, but not all of them would decide about the situation in China and what China's policies should be abroad. It is the turn of the Politburo, the Central Committee, 200 odd members, and the Politburo, which is 24 members, and 7-member all-powerful Politburo Standing Committee. Now, these are the ones who actually decide about the foreign policy. on how to interact, on how to formulate the policies. So it is the Communist Party's elite section which decides about the foreign policy. So one of the fundamental things, because it is the Communist Party, which is the mover and shaker in the Chinese system. So one of the fundamental things is the regime security. Um, the Communist Party security is paramount, and they keep watching, monitoring every other event in the global domain for any negative consequences for the Chinese Communist Party and how to reduce those negative consequences. And learning lessons from the Soviet Union, which disintegrated in 1991. First, the CPSU, the Communist Party of the Soviet Union, CPSU, that disintegrated first, and then the Soviet Union. So China is aware that it is the Communist Party security which is most important than compared to any other aspect of China. So it is the regime security, it is the Communist Party's survival, which is the key in the foreign policy of China. This looks quite strange, but learning from the Soviet experience, this is the most important aspect. And so what it means is, for example, there are several colored revolutions abroad, right? You may have heard about the Tulip Revolution, the Orange Revolution, the Jasmine Revolution in West Asia, in Tunisia at the time, and the Saffron Revolution in Myanmar, Rose Revolution, and so on. So these colored revolutions are for regime change, and many NGOs, many other international institutions like Open Society, Freedom House, they tend to promote the colored revolutions. So China is keenly observing these activities and instruct the Chinese embassies abroad to learn more about it and to counter it in one form or the other. So, as you all know, in 1989, there was the Tiananmen Square massacre. And as a follow up, the Chinese have banned any democratic organizations or individuals who promote democracy in China. And so colored revolutions have a very big say in terms of the survival of the Communist Party. And linked to this is the phenomena of defections. We hardly see currently any defections from China, political prisoners. They keep going abroad, but never allowed back into China. After the Tiananmen Square heroes have gone abroad, Wu Kaishi and others, they were never allowed to go back to China. And so the defections, political defections, is a key variable in this aspect in terms of the protection of the Communist Party. So that is number one. The foreign policy has to evolve measures so that the Communist Party survival is not threatened in any form. So that's the fundamental aspect of the China's foreign policy. The second is the narrative that China is a civilizational state, but it was victimized under the Opium Wars, what they call a century of humiliation. So, as we all know, China has been a civilizational state. The Peking man was traced to 5,000 years, and China had a very big, huge experience in terms of running the state and foreign policy. They had in 6th century BC the warring states, the autumn period, and the romance of three kingdoms, the outlaws of the marsh, and other classics like our Mahabharata and Ramayana were written during this 6th century BC. It is basically the ideas for creating vertical and horizontal alliances to outsmart the 9 states that prevailed in 6th century BC. These are very small states, but nevertheless, the ideas that they promoted by these 9 states, some like outsmarting the other, preserving one's strength, or some kind of Matsya Nyaya, as we see in Kautilya's Ardhashastra. They also have similar ideas. The most important one is how to protect the state. So essentially, here is the logic. So we were great before we declined because of the Opium Wars or the century of humiliation, and this victimhood is proposed to everybody, and diplomatically they are put in defensive measures. India also has had Jallianwala Bagh massacre. We also had several atrocities, including the Bengal famine of 1943, which killed several million people. Nevertheless, the Indian leadership never mentions that this is our century of humiliation. So we joined the Commonwealth, which were led by the colonial powers. Still, we said bygones are bygones, and we are starting afresh in the international system. But the Chinese refused to do so, and they coined this century of humiliation in order to put the adversary in a defensive manner and possibly to encash in terms of FDI, technology, and market access, and others. So, in other words, how to weaponize the past, how to encash the events that have happened in 1842, 1858, or others. And it comes out handy for China to put the other side on the defensive. So this is the century of humiliation. And this narrative, they keep on dishing out extensively. Today, of course, China is rising. It's $19 trillion GDP. It has, as we discussed, 40 or $4 trillion as the trade component. They have launched several global initiatives like the Belt and Road Initiative, Global Civilizational, Global Security, Global Development, and recently Global Governance Initiative. So with these initiatives, China had risen in the international system, and the century of humiliation takes a backseat, even though it pops up once in a while to keep the flock together within China. The third component of the Communist Party's ideology is the narrative about China rejuvenation and China dream. China rejuvenation, they did not explain what exactly it means, but in terms of diplomacy, in terms of foreign policy, and linkages with the external, One of the key things about China rejuvenation is that um, Arunachal Pradesh belongs to China. That is what they actually mean by rejuvenation. Um, the argument is Arunachal Pradesh is configured as Changnan. Changnan means southern Tibet, and Tibet is part of China, so southern Tibet should be part of China. So you may have seen the lady who was transiting through Shanghai last week. She was taken into custody for 18 hours, even though she had a valid visa and tickets to go to Tokyo from London, where she has to fly to Tokyo. Um, Pema was harassed for long hours without access to food and other things, which means that the China rejuvenation is going to be costly for the neighbors. Because by 2049, what China perceived to be their lands historically, so they want all these lands to be taken back. Even if it is a war, a nuclear war, a total destruction, hame to chahiye. That was the argument. So the first measure will be taking Taiwan uh, and the South China Sea. South China Sea is about 3.4 million square kilometers, almost the size of India. And 80% of this they want to take. What is the reason? The reason is during the Ming Dynasty, some of their ships went to these islands and in 13th century, and they find some coins on these reefs, etc. And so all of that territory is that of China's. So it's a very historical claim argument, uh, which was quashed by um, the Hague Tribunal, the Permanent Court of Arbitration in July 2016. They said you cannot have any historical claim to any territory. That is not legal. Um, and it also said that the you cannot draw an EEZ, exclusive economic zone, from an artificial reef. And it also mentioned about the environmental degradation with the dredging projects in the South China Sea and the protection of the fishermen who have been fishing for centuries. These are mainly Filipino fisheries, but also the other Southeast Asian countries' fishermen. So, in other words, the court has said this is null and void. Yet, China insists that 80% of this South China Sea belongs to them. And it had barricaded the whole area and considers this as its territorial sea, which means it will not allow anybody's commerce to pass through, thus also violating the freedom of navigation principle and the rule of law. Nevertheless, this is what China rejuvenation means. Very clear, although they don't mention, equate all of these, but China rejuvenation means we lost those territories before, and so we want to regain those territories now. That's what rejuvenation means. So, excuse me. So, last week there was a social media post in China stating that Vladivostok belonged to that of China. Um, there were some um, Chinese who also stated Hawaii belongs to China because some ships may have gone somewhere in history And so today, China claims all of those. By the way, one of the kings of Sri Lanka at the time, Ceylon, was kidnapped and taken to the Chinese court in Xi'an in the 13th century. And more likely, China claims the whole of Sri Lanka in the future, if they have not claimed so far. Of course, as you all know, they have taken Hambantota on a 99-year lease, and possibly they will claim the whole of Sri Lanka in future. Also, with this China rejuvenation, the Changhasa expeditions also landed in Kerala. So it is another candidate in future to be part of China in terms of China's rejuvenation. So, in other words, this is what the progression China wants. uh, as a part of this, China had launched the Belt and Road Initiative in 2013. And there is the Made in China 2025, which was launched in 2015. And after this Made in China, they are planning to launch Create in China for the next decade, meaning they basically on inventions, on robotics, on other aspects, semiconductors, and so on and so forth. So diplomacy should secure the primacy of the Communist Party. That's the fundamental aspect of this determinant, which means that the raw materials, the market access, FDI, exports, or even protecting the China's tech companies. For example, you may have heard about 4 years ago, Meng Wanzhou case, where the Huawei company's founder's daughter, Meng Wanzhou, was arrested in Canada. So China arrested two Canadians, two Michaels, and they were released only after this lady was released. She was accused of, she is a financial officer, works in Huawei. And she was accused of transferring funds using some of these for the ballistic missile, etc., etc. It's a little bit complicated, but that's the story. So she was arrested, but only after these two Canadians were released that the whole issue was resolved. So, in other words, the tech companies, even though Huawei is said to be a private company, Ren Chengfei, the founder, whose daughter was arrested, Ren Chengfei is a PLA officer, People's Liberation Army officer before. So he runs the Huawei company, which is one of the biggest companies in the world. And as I was mentioning, they're also leaders in 5G networks. So protection of Chinese tech companies is very important. While India banned TikTok after the Galwan incident, the Americans are protecting the TikTok, even though it is snooping on the citizens in terms of data security and others. So this is quite strange, but this is what is happening in terms of these tech companies. This is important. The other formulation is President Xi Jinping mentioned that currently the globe is witnessing changes unseen in a century, in this century, meaning you have the COVID-19, you had the global pandemic, you had the supply chain disruptions, you had the Russia-Ukraine conflict, you had Israel-Gaza-Iran conflict, and global financial crisis some 15 years ago. and the other major events, the tech disruptions, for instance, the AI, all these are lumped together in this century of uh, the formulation that changes unseen in a century, which basically means for China, there is a decline of the West, and there are opportunities for China and like-minded countries who can bandwagon with China. So that was the narrative that China is currently pushing forward. That United States is declining and China is rising. Now they keep on mentioning multipolarity, but they don't mention about multipolarity in Asia, which basically means that China wants to encash any decline of the West to become the next hegemon, replacing the United States. Yet it doesn't want any equals. And hence this formulation of century of the changes unseen in a century. So China had proposed a community of common destiny or shared destiny as a way of cobbling up support in the in the international system. Again, they have not defined what is a community of shared destiny, um, other than mentioning partnerships. As you know, in alliance formations, the destiny of A and B are the same. And there is a lot of give and take between A and B in the international system. One example we can see is the NATO. Even though NATO is in doldrums because of the Trump's policies recently, nevertheless, NATO can be seen as a community of shared destiny, which then means that uh, China is striving for military alliances um, uh, uh, at the most, but at the least, allies and friends in the international system through this formulation of community of common destiny. So that is what is one of the aspects of the Communist Party's aspirations. Finally, in this section, I would like to say that the the party's ideology and aspirations are channelized through small leading groups, including one on the foreign policy. This small leading group, it's called Chungyang Lingtao Xiaozu. Through these small leading groups, headed by the General Secretary of the Communist Party and the Premier and various other members, the small leading group is the highest decision-making body of the foreign policy. We can say something like the Standing Committee of the Parliament on foreign policy, on foreign affairs in the Indian context. Or we can say the China Study Group, the classified China Study Group in the Prime Minister's office, which deals with the China-related issues. And so the small leading group in China is the highest decision-making body. Below that is the Communist Party's central office. Later, the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. So the Ministry of External Affairs in our side is more powerful than the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of China, because the Ministry of Foreign Affairs is led by the small leading group and the central office of the Chinese Communist Party. So, in terms of the context here, we see that the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of China is not as powerful as the Ministry of External Affairs. Um, so that is one takeaway of this. Below that, there are provincial governments and also, of course, the army. The Chinese army controls the peripheral regions of China, like Tibet, like Xinjiang, like Yunnan, Guangxi, and other regions, Inner Mongolia. The army's role is decisive in foreign policy when we discuss about these regions, Tibet or other regions that I just mentioned. So, in other words, the foreign ministry has less leverages than compared with the PLA when it comes to the neighboring countries where the PLA is deployed heavily in the bordering areas. So that is a strange thing in the Chinese foreign ministry practice. So this is number one determinant. Number two determinant is the national interest. But I was mentioning to you that till 1982, the Communist Party did not mention about national interest in the party literature. Of course, does that mean China didn't had a concept of national interest before 1982? No, they had a concept, but it was not made public. It was made public only in 1982 after the reform program has been announced in 1978. So this is the key issue in terms of national interests. A former state councillor, by the way, the state councillor is more powerful than the foreign minister. So very strange things in China. The foreign ministry itself is not powerful. It is a small leading group. Then foreign minister is not that powerful. There is a level called the state councillor. Of course, today's foreign minister is also the state councillor. And hence, this is a significant post. Nevertheless, in 1982, when Dai Pinko was the state councillor, he formulated three major core interests as a part of the national interests. So he said maintenance of the fundamental system and state security of China. The fundamental system of China is Communist Party led. I want you to understand that in China, the Communist Party is the leading organ. Everywhere there will be a Communist Party unit. If you go to a canteen, there is a Communist Party leadership. If you go to a university, it is run by the Communist Party. If you go to a think tank, if you go to a business, small and medium enterprises or big enterprises, there is a Communist Party unit in these enterprises. 73% of all private enterprises in China have a party unit. Of course, they don't speak Marxism, Leninism, Mao Zedong thought, all that stuff, but they convey what is happening in that private enterprises or any other firm which employs more than 7 people should have a party committee. So they channelize these views to the Central Committee of the Communist Party. So when Dai Pinko suggested maintenance of its fundamental system and state security, it means that the Communist Party's supremacy should be strengthened, should continue. State security, he also mentioned, that is, of course, the Communist Party regime security, as well as the its aspirations. So you have 2 ministries dealing with this subject: Ministry of State Security, Ministry of Public Security, and then there is the People's Armed Police Force, and then the law and order mechanisms. So they protect the state security with Communist Party at the center. So that is what Dai Pinko said is the core interest of China. Number one, core interest. Number two is protection of state sovereignty and territorial integrity. So we know that China has several sovereignty and territorial integrity issues. These include Taiwan, Tibet, Xinjiang, Hong Kong, South China Sea, East China Sea in terms of the Senkaku Islands, and others. So totally they have 14 land neighbors and 6 maritime neighbors. So they have been pushing forward for the China's position strengthened among these land neighbors and maritime neighbors. So this is the second most important core interest of China. And China had gone to war based on these core interests. It went to war on the Korean Peninsula because Chou En-lai, the then premier, said if Korea is occupied by the pro-Western groups, then the lips and teeth will be exposed. The northeast of China will be exposed to the Western influences. So he used the analogy of lips and teeth in 1951. And so China went to war in Korean War. More than 1 million people were killed in the Korean War. So that is first war. The second is 1962 border clashes with India. The third is with the Soviet Union in 69 and with the Vietnamese in 1979. But with the core interests keeping expanding, we probably will see China will be clashing with several countries in the future. So that is very likely to happen. The third core interest that Dai Pinko mentioned is stable development of economy and society. Unlike the chaotic times of Great Leap Forward, Cultural Revolution, and so on, in 1978, China launched the Four Modernizations Program, and the Foreign Ministry has a responsibility to make this successful on economy and on the development of society. For example, unlike the Indian embassies abroad, who do not protect the Indians if they are caught up in some kind of problems, even though that is their duty, nevertheless, we see everyone fending for themselves. Even though I should say that India did evacuate some 52,000 people from West Asia, North Africa, and from Poland, Ukraine, and other areas. Still, the Chinese embassies abroad are also tasked with the promoting the four modernizations. For example, FDI, technology. Many of these were accused of spying in foreign lands and grabbing the technologies for the success of the modernization of China. So that is what diplomacy does for China in terms of this new, of this second determinant on protecting national interests. The third determinant, I think I'm running out of time. I will quickly mention about these and take questions. The third determinant is nationalism. Chinese nationalism is targeting Japan since the 1930s. And we saw when the Japanese Prime Minister mentioned about the existential threat that Chinese invasion of Taiwan may have on Japan. The Consul General of China um, in Japan, he said that we will cut off the neck of the Japanese Prime Minister. Uh, that is the kind of wolf warrior diplomacy, nationalism the Chinese diplomats have. Of course, we don't know where he is. Xue Chun of Osaka, the Consul General of Osaka. We do not know where he is now currently, but I'm sure he will be given promotion for stirring up the pot and the China-Japan relations. So the wolf warriors get a lot of traction in Chinese politics. So that is the kind of nationalism against Japan. But Chinese nationalism is also directed against the United States. During the Belgrade bombings of the Chinese embassy, when some of the Chinese embassy officials were said to be transferring the B-2 stealth bomber technologies received from the Yugoslavians and transferring to China. So the CIA bombed the two officers in the Chinese embassy in 1997. So it led to huge anti-US nationalism at that time. Chinese nationalism is also directed against South Korea when the THAAD system was deployed in southern South Korea. The company which leased the land, the Lotte Group, which is a commercial group, something like Walmart, something like other big consumer-based companies. Now, Chinese demonstrated on the Lotte Group, its shares fell, and China weaponized tourism, stopped the Chinese tourists going to Jeju Island, which attracts a lot of Chinese tourists, 98% of them, as they are now doing to Japan after the Prime Minister's speech in the parliament. Nationalism is also directed against India. And we saw the Xinhua News Agency carrying, those of you who observed the Doklam incident, we see that there was a Sikh boy with beard and turban, and he was lampooned by Xinhua News Agency, which is a Communist Party newspaper, yet it took racist turns by lampooning a section, a heroic section in India. So, in other words, this is a nationalist rhetoric from China on India. We also keep listening to in the social networking sites about India in pejorative manner. So we see nationalism against China as well, against India as well in China. Nationalism is reflected in terms of stressing sovereignty on all those issues that we discussed about previously. Chinese Foreign Ministry keeps on mentioning about the sacred territory that needs to be protected. And this comes frequently when the Chinese were waterbombing the Filipino sailors in the West Philippine Sea. Nationalism is reflected in control over Weibo and WeChat. Within 24 hours, everything which is published will be censored, which is inimical to China's interests. And nationalism is promoted through these social networking sites. And so we see a singular tone in entire China. No deviation is permitted in this narrative. So nationalism is quite powerful in China. And it is also reflected in wolf warrior diplomacy or the ban on rare earth metals recently on the US or on other countries, including India, by the way. Rare earth metals were banned for India as well. The fourth determinant is globalization. I did mention a few things before, so let me mention here the fifth, which is the focus on the then superpowers and currently the superpower, the United States. So in China's foreign policy, one of the major determinants is the focus on the most powerful nation. And today, President Trump announced a G2, even though China did not acknowledge that position. Nevertheless, G2 means that China and the United States will rule the rest of the world. That is what G2 meant. And so that has now become a determinant in China's foreign policy. Let me stop here. I think I took more time, but I'm willing to engage in terms of the discussion with the distinguished audience. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you so much, Professor Kondapalli, for your insightful and engaging lecture. I think your analysis has given us a clearer and more grounded understanding of the factors that shape China's foreign policy today. We appreciate the clarity and the depth you brought to this complex subject.